Delos loved the old homes of Sungarde. They looked strange and tickled his eyes, making him smile every time he looked at one. The odd and unnecessary angles of the buildings made them look so different from the more common new homes and structures around the city. The old homes were holdovers from the long dead age of the early Phasian civilization that lived on the island capital of the Dusklands before the Dusklands were a kingdom. There were only a handful left in the city, and they were treated as oddities more than as homes now. Delos was climbing up one such old home for the sport of telling his friends that he had done so when he saw them the next time. This one had a twisting spire on it raised 2 full stories above most of the buildings that surrounded it. His fingers gripped at the ancient joints between the gray stones as he climbed the twisting spire, determined to sit on top of it and watch the last of the sunset. Delos was no stranger to climbing. He spent a lot of time in the woods as a small lad, climbing trees as if they were his second nature. He knew if Kevin could see him right now, he would be jealous. His friend was a stout lad, and would have a lot of trouble climbing anything that did not have steps built into it. He had met Kevin in the market after he arrived in the capital several months ago, and they immediately became friends. Kevin even introduced him to some of the other kids his age who were free to run the city without adult supervision. They had become a bit of a gang, finding food together in an abandoned home. They relied on each other for support in a city that would swallow them alive, were they each other on their own. Hand over hand, Delos easily scaled the spire, supporting himself by digging his toes into the same joints between the stones he gripped with his fingers moments before. He was careful and attentive as he climbed, knowing he would not survive the fall 4 stories down to the cobblestone streets below. He found a windowsill halfway up the spire and rested on the ledge while looking in the warped old glass panes to see if he could make anything out inside. The darkness behind the glass led to disappointment. He could not make out a single detail of what was behind the glass. He sighed and continued climbing, and within a few short minutes had pulled himself up onto a small triangular landing on top of the spire. The platform had a trap door on it, and Delos tried to lift it with its iron ring, but it was locked from the other side. Delos let go of the ring and stood up, slowly turning so he could take in the whole city from above. The view was magnificent. Over the water he could see the sun touching the sea on the edge of the horizon. He looked down at the marketplace and saw the day merchants were already tearing down their stalls and loading their valuable goods in wagons to take home. The night merchants, as they were known, needed to take no extra secure measures to protect their wares. They had homes adjacent to their stalls, and the merchants would bring down divided walls and gates before retiring for the night. Delos slowly turned, and he saw the horned house across the market. It was the largest and strangest looking of all the old homes. The strange building would probably be his next climb tomorrow or perhaps later in the week. It had 3 large twisting spires that were all taller than the one he was perched on now. The building had a look to it that made a lot of people nervous, but it fascinated Delos. He was from lands east of the capital on the mainland of the northern Dusklands Peninsula. The Phasian civilization that had built the old homes did so mostly on the western coast, and so before he had arrived at Sungarde, he had never seen one of the ancient Phasian dwellings. Now he thought of them as part of the city's identity, ancient guardians watching over the kingdom with eyes from the past. As Delos admired the horned house, he thought about the wild rumors swirling about the bizarre-looking structure. Some of the local children, who weren't on the street like Delos was, said the place was haunted by the spirits from the ancient local tribes of the Phasian culture, the progenitors of the black-haired and blue-eyed Dusklander race. Most of those who spoke of hauntings had blonde hair and green eyes, and didn't venture out of the homes of their wealthy Dawnlander parents after the sun eclipsed the western horizon. Though the boy was friendly with and liked those children and played with them, it was not long after their parents found out about the nice pale boy I met with blue eyes. Each of his Dusklander descended chums would stop coming around or make excuses when he sought them out. Delos had a better understanding of why he was being shunned when he saw himself in the reflection of standing water next to the friends he still had left. Save for the lone girl Nyla, the rest of his friends were raven-tressed and freckled, pale-skinned and blue-eyed gang of Dusklander boys. They weren't trouble, not really. Sure, they liked to make some noise and maybe embarrass each other a bit for a side-splitter, but they also watched out for each other the way a close-knit group of friends is supposed to when they aren't running each other down. The trouble they caused was largely harmless, and a cure for their boredom, as half the gang he ran with had no real home to go back to after running around with him all day. When the sun set, Delos' favorite part of the day, he knew he could go back home. Even the new boy, Michael. He can go home when the dark night comes. Not Kevin or Nyla, though. The best they have is the squat. And who knows how long before the guards figure it out and hustle them out of there. Delos' young mind was sympathetic to their homelessness, but there was no way he could bring those kids home with him. They wouldn't understand how not normal things were for him at his home. But he didn't want to see them on the streets either. He wrestled with their circumstances as he pulled a bundle of venison jerky from his pocket that Delos brought with him from home. He chewed a piece thoughtfully as he watched the sun start to drop behind the ocean. The resultant light show and brilliant colors were more entertaining than any play he saw in the square, and better than any story he had ever heard. From his view above the buildings around him, he could see how beautiful the coastal city looked at sunset. The warm colors lit the stones of the buildings across the city, both new and old construction. It stirred a feeling inside of him that gave him hope that life was just hard for him and his friends right now. The streets were rough for a boy of his age and circumstances, but all the danger and noise of the city felt a million leagues below him now. Delos imagined that is what it felt like to be a bird so high up above the city. He found a few pebbles on the edge of the platform and tossed them over the side, observing them with sporting interest as they dropped to the winding streets far below. Watching the pebble fall made him feel dizzy, and he got on one knee to steady himself, bringing his eyes up from the streets below and level to the surface he stood on. That's when Delos saw the black and writhing mass of slimy tentacles begin to come up over the far side of the triangular-shaped roof platform. From his position on one knee, he saw one tentacle, then two, then more as the creature adhered slimy black appendage after slimy black appendage against the stones to help leverage its ascent. It slithered in near silence, the ink-colored tentacles grabbing at the edge of the roof landing and anchoring to the platform as the rest of the creature came into Delos' view from the edge and stood up more or less straight, if Delos' frightened mind had to say. He wanted to scream, but was paralyzed in fear. The monster made of writhing black tentacles now stood to its full height before him, immense and menacing. The indescribable horror looked like it was levitating, bobbing up and down in a slithering jumble of maddening movements just a few feet from him. The chaotic mass of tentacles made it impossible for Delos to detect any actual shape or outline to the thing he was seeing. Its silhouette was changing constantly as it put weight on various undulating appendages momentarily to only be replaced by the next slithering tentacle a moment later. It never seemed to stop wriggling and shifting its weight, quietly slithering in its sickening dance in place. Delos was caught in the nose by a strong and briny smell like that of the sea, as if he were standing down by the wharf. It was an overpowering and fishy stench, settling heavily in his nostrils and making his stomach turn, bringing on the urge to retch. It was his reaction to the foul odor that shook him out of his paralysis. Delos slowly stood up, his small body not even a third the height of the creature across the rooftop platform from him. He slowly looked back over his shoulder at where he had climbed up the spire of the old home. He wanted to immediately scramble down, but knew that if he did so in fear and too much haste, he would fall over 4 stories down, and most certainly to his death. Delos turned back to the floating mass of writhing black tentacles and swallowed hard. He took a half step backwards away from the monstrous creature that slithered and undulated unnaturally before him. The creature finally noticed Delos' movements. All of its tentacles shot in different directions violently in surprise. Some became rigid, others coiling to strike. It stood tall above him, hissing and clicking almost inaudibly. From deep in the mass of the black writhing madness, a single spherical red eye appeared and opened, staring at him menacingly as the tentacles began to reach for him. The hourglass-shaped pupil was unlike anything Delos had ever seen in an animal or person. He felt paralysis gripping him again, but this time Delos found his voice and screamed. He shrieked in the ear-piercing terror that only a boy of 9 winters could make when confronted by the reality of a horror he and most others didn't know existed. The creature moved with incredible speed as its tentacles shot out to grab Delos around his skinny wrists, wrenching him into place as the thing got closer to him. The grotesque red eye examined him, seeming to be searching for something on or about the boy. Delos screamed again before another tentacle wrapped around his head, covering his mouth and muffling the boy's screams of terror. Delos could no longer breathe as the tentacle constricted around his mouth tightly. The creature made wet, sloshing sounds as it quickly began wrapping the boy up with more appendages. Far below, Delos could hear his dog barking and howling incessantly, trying to alert anyone nearby that the boy was being attacked. Delos felt like an idiot for climbing up there and cursed himself for what could be a deadly curiosity. The slimely, formless monster's tentacles squeezed him hard, and Delos could feel a slippery ichor against his skin wherever they touched him. He began to feel woozy and tingly as the ooze covered him. He had almost blacked out then, unable to draw breath, his head swimming in a yellow haze. His vision went black around the edges as he felt his consciousness begin to fade. Delos thought of his mother and her beautiful long golden hair and kind blue-green marbled eyes. The warm vision lulled and cradled him towards eternal slumber when the sensation was overtaken by Delos suddenly being released from the thing's grasp, and he was able to draw breath again for what would have been his one last desperate gasp for air. The tentacle had moved from over his mouth and nose, and he could feel the grip of the creature's other slimy appendages beginning to loosen their grip on him as well. Delos' chest burned as he heaved and gasped for air when he felt the creature suddenly release him, dumping him on the timbers of the platform in sudden seeming disinterest. His skin tingled all over as the thing slithered away from him, its tentacles writhing and pushing the undulating, writhing mass across the type of the spire and away from Delos. There it stayed for only a moment while Delos struggled and heaved, trying to regain his breath. Slowly, the red eye with the hourglass-shaped pupil closed and disappeared into the central mass of the writhing black tentacles. Nearly in silence, the creature dropped back down over the edge, tentacles gripping at the stones as it began to slither down the old home's spire. Delos, covered in slime and breathing heavily, watched the thing disappear over the edge. He stood up slowly from the heaped-over position the creature had put him down on and slowly approached the edge of the spire, still feeling where the many tentacles had gripped and held him against his will effortlessly. Delos gently gripped a sore wrist that was covered in pink, round suction marks and looked down over the edge where it had descended. The unnatural thing was gone as fast as it had shown up. Delos was certain he was going to die moments before, and the tentacled creature had just seemed to change its mind about finishing Delos off mid-murder. Sheepstung. What just happened? What was that thing? Did it even have a mind inside that mess? Why did it let me go? Delos' heart was beating hard and relentlessly in his chest as all the questions raced through his mind. He stood there breathlessly. The dog in the street below continued to bark and howl up towards him, and Delos heaved in a deep breath as he stood there still shaking from the attack. He was confused but thankful that he had not just become a meal of the beast that he could barely fathom, let alone describe accurately. I can't tell the lads about this. They're all going to think I've gone bonkers. The sun glowed on the horizon over the sea in orange and purple hues. Delos couldn't see its beauty anymore. He stood there shaking and looking down the spire of the old home in disbelief for too long of a time before deciding he needed to leave. He gingerly began to climb down towards the street, the descent giving him more pause than any of his recent climbing adventures. He stopped a few feet down the spire, his suddenly weak fingers almost causing him to lose his grip. He opened and closed one shaking hand, stretching it and feeling it tingle and feeling lifeless. He breathed deeply, trying not to panic, and gripped each handhold he used on the way up with a mindful precision while lowering himself back down. Delos arrived at the ledge partway down the spire and began to creep across it, and utilized the easier foot and handholds going down from there. Against his better judgment, Delos paused to look again in the darkened window. For less than a second, he saw the movement of some black tentacles belonging to the creature moving against the back of the glass, covering it in slime. Delos gasped before he could further react. The massive tentacles moved upwards and out of the view of the darkened window allowed inside. Delos didn't further hesitate. He hastened his downward climb out of fear, nearly losing his grip and footing several times on loose mortar and stone during his descent. Delos scrambled out of panic and deep need to get on his feet on ground immediately. His breath raced and his heartbeat pounded as his ears and chest the whole way down. He was scared, uncomfortable, and soaked in sweat, and with slimy residue from his encounter with the tentacled creature. He felt sweat pour down his temples and navigated the twisting spire downward before landing on the strangely angled upper story of the building. Delos bolted across the rooftop before grabbing a railing and flinging himself over it, dropping the remaining distance and landing hard on the stone pavers below. When his feet hit the ground, his legs shook with the impact. The bottoms of his feet and lower legs absorbed the shock, and for several long moments Delos wondered if he had broken one or several bones in his legs. They moved, but slowly and with great difficulty. He looked upwards at the spire of the old home while slowly moving and stretching his legs and straightening up. He suddenly understood why some of the older and Dawnlander residents of Sungarde looked upon these ancient structures with suspicion and fear. He backed away from the building a few steps, his eyes wide, still in fright. The sudden touch of wetness against his hand made Delos startle badly and yelp. He turned, sure his tentacle attacker was on him again. His eyes saw a flash of movement in white and black and brown, and there was his dog, licking his hand before the furry canine drew back away from him, frightened. Delos let out a sigh of relief and dropped into a crouch, and gently beckoning for the fluffy tricolored dog to come close again. With only a moment of doubt, the dog's tail began wagging, and he came over to greet Delos with licks and then rolled onto his back to receive belly rubs. Delos was happy to oblige. Petting the good boy seemed to calm him. The dog's cloudy eyes and facial fur, peppered with gray, showed his age. He was an elder in dog terms, but still able and eager to please. "You're such a good old boy. You were trying to tell people I was in trouble, weren't you?" His companion was happy with praise and petting and scrambled around Delos playfully, lowering his head down to the ground before letting out a happy howl and several yips. Delos scratched the shaggy dog behind the ears and stood up. The dog circled him and then ran off down the street towards the market. Delos smiled as he smelled the aroma of food being cooked. The heavenly smells of food he could not afford came wafting through the air, and Delos watched his dog run towards its source. He had taken one step without disruption before the terror that shook him only minutes prior took hold of him once again. The dog had caused him to let his guard down too soon, as Delos heard a nearby high-pitched wail of terror. The sudden scream came from only a short distance away, perhaps on the next city block. His dog heard it too and turned back towards the boy and began barking again, its hackles and fur all rising down the center of its back. Delos looked around to see where the scream had come from, panicked the thing might be on top of him again. Delos' whole world spun as he looked around in terror and expectation that the slimy tentacled monster had come back to finish him off. Within a few moments of the scream, Delos saw a nearby city guardsman spot him and began jogging in approach. He was a tall man with brown hair and a mustache, a pug nose, and a round face. His hard leather armor was covered by a yellow tabard that bore the royal symbol of the Rostov family, a black raven. Though new to the city, Delos knew the symbol of his tabard indicated he was a member of the Raven Guard. They were the king's personal crack unit of guards and soldiers handpicked by General Karsh, the Arcanian, whom everyone serving under called Pater, or Father. The guard's voice was gruff and thick with Eastern Dawnlander accent, as he tried to sound authoritative and stern. "What was that, boy? Was that you that was carrying on and disturbing the peace at sunset?" "No, sir," Delos replied, still frightened. He tried to tell the guard what he saw and heard, but before he could speak, the guard wildly changed the subject. "What's that you got all over you? You fall in? Get too close to the water down at the wharf? Sure smells like it." "No, sir," Delos repeated. He looked around nervously and began to point to where the scream came from, but the guardsman put his hands on his hip and admonished the boy for causing trouble. "No more trouble from you now. Get home to your mother, boy. No needs for you to be out on the street after dark without an adult." "Yes, sir, but..." Delos offered in the same frightened tone, but the bearded guardsman nodded and walked past him. He was headed the opposite from the direction Delos heard the scream come from. "Sir?" Delos asked, raising his voice. The big man turned back towards him. "What now, lad?" "The noise came from that way." Delos pointed in the direction he heard the scream come from. He tried to convey how frightened he was and added, "Something is out there. I saw..." The guardsman cut him off. "No, lad." It was then that Delos saw the guardsman's face was pale and apprehensive as he looked in the direction Delos pointed, then back at the boy. Delos saw the fear in the Raven Guard's eyes before the man looked away, unable to meet Delos' frightened gaze. "That's not my patrol." The guardsman turned away quickly and walked off in the opposite direction that Delos had pointed to, leaving the youngster standing in the street next to the old home. His surroundings had become eerily quiet and empty. From a nearby storm drain, the boy heard an unnatural, strangling-sounding gurgle, followed by a soft hissing sound, causing Delos to cautiously back away. The dog lingered nearby, whining through his nose at Delos while his ears laid back on his graying head. He shifted back and forth on four paws, nervously causing the Delos to look at his dog with sympathetic fear. The boy made a quick click with his tongue and began to jog away. The dog fell in behind him, and they ran together away from the peculiar and now dreadful old home, and back towards the empty two-story residence that his friends were temporarily squatting at the edge of the market. The sun was gone now, and the first light of Cain and Penel were rising in the east. The Moon Dragons looked down at the boy ranging through the city in curiosity, as Delos and his dog ran through the maze of streets and alleys to escape their gaze.